And that could have just caused like a snowball effect.
Absolutely. And I think too, it's, you know, there's that saying that the only thing worse than a snotty kid is a snotty kid who's right. Like, and yeah. I don't think they were snotty kids at all, but I think Jeff Fenster saw them that way, and they were right on top of it. And you're right, their father was no slouch. He was an oil contractor, so he knew how to wheel and deal with some of the top wheelers and dealers in the world. I mean, he traveled all over the world doing oil contracts, which is the biggest industry in the universe, right? So he wasn't gonna sit there and let some A&R guy bully his kids into becoming the Backstreet Boys and releasing lunchboxes, you know? No. So, although they do have a lunchbox now, the edible pants lunchbox, but you know what I'm saying? Like they had, like you said, their foundation was really important to them, and their parents really supported that desire, that trueness to their integrity.
And if you watch the documentary, one of the first voices that you do hear is Walker.
Yes.
And which is a surprise. You don't really see Walker too much, their parents, but you heard his voice. There's a picture that like Taylor is looking into a mirror, and Walker is talking to someone, and he's kind of like laying the business down. So very much you can see how important family is to this band, and I can totally see that Walker's like, not my boys, no, like this is not right. And that's why I believe that Walker was there in the room. They needed that support, they needed that integrity to be with them. And I even remember in an interview when they were talking about New York, Taylor was saying that like how their dad was with them. So I believe for a majority of when Hanson was younger, that Walker was there quite often.
Yes.
So it's something to be said about family presence when you are handling with a big music industry, because you have seen kids who have parents who are not that involved. Look at how some of them have ended up.
Or they were involved in like the wrong way.
Yeah.
Like Gary Coleman or Lindsay Lohan, whose parents like took their money, you know, mismanagement. I mean, these boys, their money was very well managed. They were not allowed to just run wild and buy Corvettes with their faces on it like Jojo Siwa is doing now. Nothing against Jojo Siwa, but I mean, they made really smart investments so that when this happened, it wasn't just like, okay, let's real deal take a chance. They had financial backing to start their own recording studio at the ages of 17, 19, and 21. And that's a big deal. Yeah,
that's a really big deal. That's a really big deal. And so throughout all of that mismanagement with the industry, it led to a breaking point with Hanson and with the company. And another thing that I didn't like from, you know, the Jeff is that there was another part where Taylor is calling him like, hi, can we speak with Jeff? And like, oh, he's not there. Oh, he just walked into a meeting. And then one of the ones that made me really mad, oh, we're sorry, he just stepped into an airplane right now. Like, what?
You had a phone conference scheduled and you're flying to Australia without rescheduling? Or come on, you wouldn't treat any other artist that way. You were doing this because of their age.
Because some way you were not upset. But I believe what was trying to be done was they were trying to make Hanson play the game that they wanted them to play. Like I believe that they knew Hanson was valuable. They knew Hanson had a fan base. They wanted to keep them, but they wanted to keep them on their own terms.
Yes.
And they wanted to make them somehow submit to them. And that's why they were being so controlling, because there came a part where they're like, well, guess what, guys? You spent so much time in a studio, now you're running out of money.
Right.
And it's kind of like, but we're in the studio because you're saying that what we're putting out is not good enough.
Right.
And now you're saying we're coming to the point where we're running out of money.
Yes. And I think it was pretty clear that Jeff Fenster was seeing dollar signs. And I think he's looking at the Backstreet Boys, and he's looking at NSYNC, and he's looking at the Spice Girls, and he's looking at this merch lineup, like the Spice Girls dolls and the Spice Girls lip balm and the Backstreet Boys lunchboxes and the NSYNC pillowcases and hats. And he's seeing fans as dollar signs. And he wants Hanson to go in that angle, and Hanson is in it for a different reason. They're a band, they write their own songs, they play their own instruments, and it is a money-making endeavor. I'm not saying that they're not, but they're playing a much more, it's a slower money-making machine, but it's more sustainable, because when was the last time the Spice Girls released anything? And here Hanson is 29 years later still going strong.
Yes. Same with Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. They're still around,
right? But
there was a long silence from them, and Hanson was still making music when a lot of these bands were completely silent.
Yes. And I think there's like a huge distinction between, and I'm always careful about the word band. I think there's a difference between a band and a group. The term boy band gets thrown around, but like, and I love the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. Like I'm not
Me too. Yeah, I get it.
About them. I love Justin Timberlake. I love all of that. But there's a big difference when I would go to a Backstreet or an NSYNC concert. I was going to see entertainment, singing and dancing. There's a huge difference between a group and a band, right? Like NSYNC and Backstreet, they're not writing their own songs. They're not playing their own instruments. They are not artists in the same way. That's not to say that singers and dancers are not artists. They are, but they're not creating in the same way that Hanson was.
Right. Yeah. And so, there came a point where it was a breaking point with Hanson and the record label, and they had to do something pretty risky. They had the chance to either sign on to a different record label or go independent or just drop out of not doing music at all. And we all know Hanson chose to go independent. And what was that? And what was that process like for them from what you took from the documentary?
So I think that they deliberated long and hard about this. I know that this was not a decision that they arrived at easily. It wasn't just like, today, now, I think they are very solid behind that choice, and they wouldn't have it any other way. But back in 2001, 2002, as they're going through this, I think they deliberated on this long and very, very, very carefully. And they had, like you said, they had three choices. They could continue to fight it out endlessly with Island Def Jam. They could sign on with another label, and they did have several other offers, the main one being Arista Records, or they could go it on their own. And I think that it came down to the place where they knew they couldn't go any further with Island Def Jam. So it was either going to be Arista. And I think, by the way, we forgot to mention this. When Hanson was first signed, they were not with Island Def Jam. They were with Mercury Records.
They were Mercury Records,
and they produced Middle of Nowhere with the Dust Brothers. And so they had a really strong backing of these people who were like, this is cool. This is kind of like this cool little kids rock pop garage band from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they really got behind that idea of these three kids who wrote songs and played instruments. And they really supported Hanson for what they were. So Mercury was always behind them. It wasn't until Mercury got bought out and merged with Island Def Jam that it became this huge corporate bureaucracy structure, right? So, but to get back to your question, I think that they contemplated this long and hard. And there's this one part in the documentary where Zach says, if we go this alone, we are gonna get buried. And I think at that point, they were leaning more towards Arista Records, the deal with Arista, and ultimately decided against it because I think they knew that they could release another record with Arista, and then maybe Arista could get bought out and they could wind up facing, they knew that they would be trading the problems they had at Island Def Jam for newer different problems. And so, and going independent also has its own problems, but all of those problems are more filled with opportunities than politics. You're always going to have challenges, but do you want challenges that are opportunities, or do you want challenges that are wrapped up in politics and bureaucracy? And they decided not to go, and thank God they didn't, because you see at the very end of the documentary, there's that little caption that says, they heavily contemplated this deal with Arista Records. Today, the head of A&R at Arista Records is none other than Jeff Fenster. The same
and Jeff Fenster, and Jeff Fenster was the person that was blocking every move Hanson made. Anything that Hanson did was not good enough. No matter what they did, was not good enough for him. Even when they brought to him the completed album of Underneath, he still wasn't pleased with it. He didn't like songs. The songs that he didn't like was like Get Up and Go. He didn't like Underneath. He didn't like the song
Hey.
He didn't like
Hey.
He didn't like Hey. He didn't like Dancing with the Wind. In fact, he even said that he believed that Dancing with the Wind did not have a place on the Underneath soundtrack. So right there, that's like 4 songs that he already did not like from Hanson. And so they were leaning towards Arista, like you said. And if they would have went to Arista, they would have been right back where we're fighting the same battles. And I believe like if Hanson would have did that route, there probably wouldn't be no more Hanson. Because I feel that they went through so much with Island Def Jam that you can see that it was really tearing them down. You can see, like, you know how the light was just like draining from them. Yeah. You can see that in the documentary.
And they also, like, in a really unique way, you know how we always say Hanson's the soundtrack of our lives, we grew up with them. In a really unique way, their independence, like the timing of their independence, they struck while the iron was hot. Because in 2003, most of Hanson's fans are just starting college, or they're like, I was going into my junior year of college. So, you know, undergrad is this time when like you're filled with ideas and creativity, and you're figuring out who you want to be and what path you want to take. So the fan base was so behind this idea of like, yes, you guys go independent, we're going to support you, because in so many ways we were figuring out our pathways in our lives at that time. So supporting them was such an inspiration to us in a way. And I feel like if they had gone with Arista, I think we still would have bought the records and it would have been fine. But if they had had that same battle with Arista and 3 years later went into independent, when the fan base wasn't in that same place in our lives, I don't know if we would have been as fired up. I mean, I think we would have still supported them, but the timing was just so perfect.
It was perfect. It was meant to be. The timing was definitely meant to be. One of the most satisfying things to me, when in a documentary you kind of saw the light in the darkness, when they started adding the fans into the documentary, and you could see they were starting to do some radio airplay, and you saw like the fans lining up, and to me it was like, yes, look, the fans are still there. And I can imagine maybe being a band like Hanson in the midst of the NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, thinking like, will our fans still be there? Like, are they still gonna be there? You know, we're gonna release this album into the ether in the midst of Britney Spears and Backstreet Boys, but as we do this, are we still gonna have fans that are gonna listen to it? And one of like the like it's like when they were able to see their fans, like Taylor, Isaac, Jack, it was like screaming for them. It's kind of like we still have our fans. They're still here, you know.
And there's that one moment where Zach is like kind of lying back in bed and he's on his cell phone and he's talking to somebody. I'm assuming it's his now wife, Kate. And he says, we're #1 on the independent charts, and he has this beaming smile and this twinkle in his eyes, and it's just like, yes. And I remember I remember at the time, and this is a conversation for another day, you know, there was so many people wanted to be the wife, you know, but that's another topic for another day. But I remember people saying like, I would give anything to be the person who makes him smile like that. Like they would want to be the person on the other end of the phone. And I'm like, don't you get it? We are the people who made him smile like that. Yeah. It's fan based. I mean, obviously he was sharing a moment with somebody he truly cares about as well, but it's his fan base that put that twinkle in his eyes to say we're number one. You know? And we're just, Hanson fans are so proud, and that's why in the song we I Don't Want to Go Home, which was released many years later, but Hanson says the lyric in that song, we wear our history like a badge of honor, because every Hanson fan is so quick to tell that story. You know, as soon as somebody goes, oh wait, isn't that the band that sang Bop in the 90s? You're like, wait, let me tell you something. And then you go into the whole thing. Well, did you know that their record label merged with another record label, and this happened, and then they went independent, and blah, 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 and you give them this whole, and then people are left at the end of it going, I never knew that. Wow. You know, but like to us, it's like your heart is touched with pride.
Yeah, it is. But you know, they're human beings, and they're not always going to get everything right. And I'm okay with that. I'm also a person that believes in redemption and forgiveness. But the overall perspective of Hanson, I am a very, 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 very proud fan of this band.
Me too.
It's strong enough to break just really, really enforced that with me, because when you brought up like the history, I can name the history of Hanson, and it makes me feel so good as a fan. And this is why we go to their concerts. Yes, it's because of Hanson, but each song has history to it. Underneath has so much history to it that I might just start bawling and crying over some songs, because when Underneath came out, I was like a freshman going on to a sophomore in college. Like I had like my first real breakup, my first boyfriend. So like that song was like my soundtrack for like my college years. So like there made me like,
absolutely. And me too. That's like when we talk about, that's why when you had invited me to do this series with you, the Soundtrack of My Life series, this was the album that I was the most excited to talk about. Like when you first said it, I was like, can we start with Underneath almost? Because I couldn't wait. But I'm glad that we went in order, you know, because you have to go in order. But just like this time period in Hanson history is so important. And there are other important things, I'm sure, when we talk about The Walk and Shout It Out and Anthem. Those are great albums as well. But this record is so significant. It defines the